My son said it so casually, like he was asking me to pick up milk on the way home. "Mom, just wait at the Tim Hortons on Bloor. We'll swing by after the banquet wraps up. Shouldn't be past 10. It was my son Andrew's biggest night. 30 years at the hospital, and the Toronto Medical Association had finally named him Cardiothoracic Surgeon of the Year. A black tie gala at the Royal York. 300 guests. The Minister of Health was flying in from Ottawa to give the keynote, and I was told to wait at a Tim Hortons. I remember folding my good wool coat over my arm, the camel-colored one I'd bought at Simon's for the occasion, thinking I might actually wear it into the ballroom. I remember the way the February wind bit through my stockings when I stepped off the streetcar at Yonge and Bloor. I remember telling myself, "Margaret, don't make a scene. He's busy. He'll come." I sat down in that corner booth with my small beaded purse on my lap and ordered a double-double and a honey cruller I didn't want. The girl behind the counter was maybe 19, with a tired smile, and she called me dear. I thanked her. I tried not to notice how she glanced at my pearl earrings, my blown-out hair, the way I was dressed like I was going somewhere. The clock above the drive-through window said 6 to 47. I told myself 10 o'clock wasn't that far away. I should explain something before I go any further, because if you're listening to this, you'll probably wonder what kind of mother lets herself be parked at a donut shop while her son gets a medal downtown. You'll wonder why I didn't just drive myself, why I didn't call a cab, why I sat there. The truth is complicated, the way truth always is. I raised Andrew alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Scarborough from the time he was 4 years old. His father, my husband James, died of an aneurysm in the spring of 1986, right after Andrew started junior kindergarten. One minute he was reading the Toronto Star at the kitchen table. The next, he was on the linoleum, and I was screaming into the phone for an ambulance that got there in 9 minutes, but may as well have taken 9 hours. I was 28 years old, a registered nurse at Scarborough General, pulling 12-hour shifts on the cardiac ward, and suddenly, I was a widow with a little boy who cried every night for 6 months, asking when Daddy was coming home. So I did what mothers do. I picked up extra shifts. I took the overnight call. I worked Christmas Eve and New Year's Day and every long weekend in July, because the premiums paid 1.5. I drove a beige 1983 Chevy Cavalier until the transmission gave out in 1998, and then I bought a used Corolla off a colleague because I couldn't afford a new one. I packed Andrew's lunches with peanut butter sandwiches and Macintosh apples and a little note that said "I love you" until he was in grade 8 and told me the notes embarrassed him in front of his friends. I made $72,000 a year at the peak of my career. It's not nothing, but in Toronto, with a mortgage and a child and no partner, it doesn't stretch the way people think it does. But I made it stretch, because I had one goal, and only one. My son was going to be a doctor. I paid every cent of his undergrad at U of T tuition, residence at Trinity College, textbooks, the MCAT prep course that cost $2,000 in 2001. When he got into McMaster's Medical School, I took out a second mortgage on the little house I'd finally managed to buy in East York. $42,000 at 7% interest, and I paid it off over the next 15 years by skipping vacations and driving that same Corolla until it had 300,000 kilometers on the odometer. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I want you to understand. When Andrew walked across the stage at Convocation Hall in 2008, and I watched them hood him Dr. Andrew J. Whitfield, I cried so hard the woman beside me handed me her Kleenex and patted my knee. That was the proudest moment of my life. I thought it would be the foundation of everything that came after. The Tim Hortons got busy around 7. A family came in, mother, father, 2 little girls in snowsuits with the hoods still up, and they took the booth beside mine. The youngest girl, maybe 5, kept sneaking looks at me over the back of the seat, and finally she pointed and said, "Mommy, that lady looks like a princess." The mother glanced over, embarrassed, and said, "Sorry." She's got a vivid imagination. I smiled. I said, "That's the loveliest thing anyone said to me in years." And then I turned my face to the window and tried not to cry in front of a stranger's children. My phone buzzed at 7:23. It was a text from my daughter-in-law, Caroline. "Running a bit behind keynote is delayed. Might be closer to 10:30. Hope you're cozy. 26. Cozy. At a Tim Hortons. On Bloor Street. In February." I wrote back, "No problem, dear. Take your time." I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, why am I not there? Because the truth is, and this is the part that took me weeks to admit to myself the truth is, I had asked. 3 weeks earlier, when Andrew first told me about the gala, I'd said, "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. What should I wear?" And there had been a pause I'd felt in my chest before I understood what it meant. "Mom," he'd said, in that careful voice he uses with difficult patience, "the thing is, Caroline's already done the seating chart. It's all hospital people and donors and the board. It's not really a family event." I'd laughed. A small laugh, the kind you make when you're covering something up. "Oh, of course. I just thought, we'll do something," he said quickly. "Dinner the next weekend, just you and me." And then, 2 days before the gala, he'd called back. "Mom, actually, Caroline thought it would be nice if you came out afterwards. We could pick you up, go for a nightcap at the hotel bar. Celebrate properly." I'd said yes. Of course I'd said yes. Because when your only son invites you, in any capacity, to the biggest night of his professional life, you say yes. I just didn't realize come out afterwards meant sit in a donut shop alone until we're done with our real guests. At 8:15, I did the thing I'd been trying not to do all evening. I opened Instagram. I don't use it much, my granddaughter. Olivia set it up for me 2 Christmases ago, so I could see photos of her skating competitions. But I knew Caroline posted on it constantly. Every charity lunch, every Muskoka weekend, every one of Olivia's birthdays. Caroline curated her life, the way she curated her powder room, everything in its place, everything visible. I typed her name into the search bar. And there it was. The first photo was Andrew at the podium, accepting the award. He looked handsome in his tuxedo. He looked like his father around the eyes. The second photo was Andrew with the Minister of Health, shaking hands. The third photo stopped my heart. It was Andrew, Caroline, Olivia, and another couple older, elegant, silver-haired. Caroline's parents, Richard and Diane Ashworth, from Forest Hill. Richard had been chief of surgery at Mount Sinai before he retired. Diane sat on the board of 3 charities I couldn't afford to donate to, and the caption, in Caroline's flowing italic font, read, "Could not have done this without the 2 people who made Andrew the man he is today. Diane, you've been a second mother to him since the day we met, and tonight we celebrate you as much as him. Richard, your mentorship shaped this career. Forever grateful. The 2 people who made Andrew the man he is today." I read it 3 times. I read it until the words stopped making sense and then started making sense again. I looked at the photograph. Caroline's mother had her arm around my son's waist. He was smiling at her the way he used to smile at me when he was 7 years old, and I'd made him a grilled cheese after a long day at school. My hands were shaking. I put the phone face down on the table. The little girl in the next booth peeked over again. She said, in that loud whisper children use, "Mommy, the princess looks sad." I want to tell you I stayed calm. I want to tell you I had some graceful, dignified reaction, the kind you see in movies. I didn't. I went to the washroom at the back of the Tim Hortons, locked myself in the single stall, and I cried the way I hadn't cried since James died. I cried for the second mortgage. I cried for the Corolla. I cried for 34 years of night shifts and skipped vacations and the anniversary trip to Quebec City we never took because Andrew needed a new winter coat. I cried for the fact that my son, my boy, had stood in front of 300 people and let his wife tell a story in which I did not exist. I was a registered nurse for 41 years. I have held the hands of dying people. I have told young mothers their babies weren't coming home. I thought I knew what pain looked like. I didn't know it could come from inside your own child. When I came out of the stall, I washed my face with cold water and I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was 68 years old. Her mascara had run. Her lipstick was gone. She looked exactly like what she was, a small, tired woman who had spent her entire life making herself useful to people who would in the end forget to mention her name. I straightened my shoulders. I fixed my hair with my fingers. I walked back to the booth, and I called my granddaughter. Olivia picked up on the second ring. She was supposed to be at the gala too, but she'd told me earlier in the week she was staying home with a migraine. Olivia is 13. She gets them from her father's side. "Grandma." "Hi, sweetheart," I said, and I tried to keep my voice steady. "Is your headache any better?" "A bit." I took the medicine. A pause. "Grandma, why aren't you at the dinner?" The question went through me like a needle. "Your mom thought it was easier if I came by afterwards," I said carefully. Another pause. Longer. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it that surprised me, a kind of flat, grown-up tiredness I'd never heard from her before. "Grandma, are you at the Tim Hortons?" "How did you know that?" "Because I heard Mom tell Dad that's where you'd be. And Dad said it was fine because you wouldn't know anyone there anyway." I closed my eyes. "Oliva," I said, "is your grandmother Diane at the gala?" "Yeah. And Grandpa Richard. They got a photo with the minister." She hesitated. "Grandma, are you okay? You sound weird." I took a long breath. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Listen to me. I need you to go to bed and rest your head. I'll see you soon. I love you very much." "I love you too, Grandma." And then, very quietly, "I'm sorry." That was the moment. Something inside me, something that had been bending for decades, finally broke clean through. I didn't wait at the Tim Hortons. I left a $5 tip for the girl behind the counter, walked out onto Bloor Street, and hailed a cab. Not an Uber, a cab. I'm old-fashioned that way. I told the driver to take me home to East York. He was a kind man from Ethiopia, and he asked me if I was all right, and I told him I was going to be. That was the first honest thing I'd said all night. I got home at 9:20. I made myself a cup of red rose tea. I don't care what anyone says about orange pekoe. Red rose is the tea of my people, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought about every check I had written, every EI topping shift I'd taken, every time Andrew had called asking if I could help out with something, the down payment on their first condo in Yorkville, $22,000 in 2014. Caroline's fertility treatments, $11,000 out of pocket in 2011. Olivia's private school at Branksome Hall, where I'd been quietly sending $4,000 a year toward the tuition since she was in grade 3. The cottage renovation in Muskoka 2 summers ago, when Andrew said they were a little short and could I lend them $18,000 until the bonus came through in December. The bonus never came through. I never asked. I sat at that table and I did the math, the way nurses are trained to do math carefully, twice, with a pen on paper. Over the last 15 years, I had given my son and his wife, in cash, roughly $147,000, not counting his education, not counting the house help out in the 90s, just the last 15 years. And tonight, at the most important professional event of his career, his wife had told 300 people, including half the Ontario medical establishment, that her own mother had raised my son. I finished my tea. I rinsed the cup. I went to bed. And at 2:47 the morning, when my phone finally rang, I reached over and turned it off without looking. The next morning, I made an appointment with my lawyer. Her name is Patricia Lamb, and she'd written my will 7 years earlier when I first retired. I'd left everything to Andrew, with a $10,000 bequest to Olivia for when she turned 21. Simple, clean, the way you do when you think your life has gone the way you planned. I sat across from Patricia at her office on Eglinton on Monday morning, and I told her what had happened. I told her about the Tim Hortons and the Instagram post and the call with Olivia. I told her about the $147,000. Patricia is a small, precise woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a gold chain. She listened without interrupting. When I was finished, she said only, "What would you like to do, Margaret?" I said, "I'd like to change my will." "How?" "Everything to Olivia. In a trust. She gets access for education and living expenses until she's 30. After 30, it's hers outright. Andrew gets nothing." Patricia nodded slowly. "And the house?" "Sell it when I'm gone. Proceeds into the trust." "Any message to your son?" I thought about that for a long time. "No," I said finally. "He's a grown man. He'll figure it out." She drew up the paperwork that afternoon. I signed it before I left her office. Then I walked across the street to the TD branch, where I'd banked for 36 years, and I closed the line of credit that Andrew had been authorized to draw on for emergencies. I changed the beneficiary on my RRIF from Andrew to Olivia. I canceled the pre-authorized payment I'd been making to Branksome Hall since Olivia was 8 years old. The last thing I did was the hardest. I opened my banking app and I transferred all $3,800 that was sitting in Andrew's personal account money I sent every month to help with Olivia's extras back into my own account. Then I removed him from my checking account entirely. By 3 o'clock Monday afternoon, I had untangled myself financially from my son. It had taken 30 years to build. It took 4 hours to unwind. I went home. I made another cup of red rose. And I waited. He didn't call until Wednesday evening. By then, he'd have seen the banking notifications. He'd have seen the transfer. He'd have checked the line of credit. I suspect Caroline noticed first, because Caroline was the one who tracked those accounts. When the phone rang and his name came up on the screen, I took a breath and answered, "Mom." His voice was tight. "Is everything okay? I'm getting all these notifications from the bank." "Everything's fine, Andrew. The line of credit is closed. The account, Mom. Did something happen?" I sat down at my kitchen table. Outside, it had started to snow big wet flakes, the kind Toronto gets in February, when the temperature hovers right around 0. "Andrew," I said, "where was I on Saturday night?" There was a long silence. "Mom, where was I?" "You were at the Tim Hortons, on Bloor." "And where were you?" "You know where I was." "Tell me anyway." I could hear him breathing. I could hear him calculating. "I was at the Gala, Mom. You knew that. You said it was fine." "I did say it was fine. You're right. I said it was fine because I wanted to be a good mother, and good mothers don't make a fuss. That's what I was taught, and that's what I've been for 68 years. "Mom, what is this about?" "It's about your wife's Instagram post, Andrew." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator hum in my kitchen. "Mom, Caroline, she meant." "Don't," I said. "Don't tell me what she meant. I read what she wrote. So did her 1,200 followers. So did your colleagues. Your wife told the world that her mother raised you. I sat in a donut shop on the most important night of your career, and I read those words while a 5-year-old at the next table was telling her mother. I looked sad. Mom, I worked 41 years, Andrew. I worked weekends. I worked the night shift on your birthday in 1993, in 1997, in 2001, because the premiums paid 1.5. I took a second mortgage on this house to send you to medical school. I wore the same winter coat for 11 years. I did all of that so that you could stand in a ballroom on Front Street and let your wife tell 300 people I don't exist. He was crying. I could hear it. Mom, I didn't read it before she posted. I swear to God, Mom, I didn't know what she was going to say. Diane helps us a lot, and Caroline, she gets caught up. Andrew, yes. Did you tell your colleagues I was dead? The silence stretched. What? Olivia told me things. Not on the phone Saturday. She called me yesterday, after school. She said, "You told Dr. Mehta last spring that your mother passed years ago. She said she overheard you at the summer barbecue." She's been carrying it around for months, Andrew, trying to decide whether to tell me. I heard him make a sound I'd never heard him make before. It was the sound of a grown man realizing he had been caught in something he couldn't explain away. "Mom, it wasn't. It was easier than explaining. Caroline's family is a certain way, and her parents at these events, and people assume, and you just let them." "Yes. Say it. Say the whole sentence. I let people think you were dead." "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for saying it out loud. I needed to hear you say it out loud." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't hang up on him. I sat at my kitchen table in East York and I watched the snow fall on the maple tree James and I had planted the summer before he died, and I told my son the truth in the calmest voice I have ever used. I told him I had changed my will. Everything was going to Olivia, in trust, for her education and her life. He would receive nothing from me, not when I died, not before. I told him the line of credit was closed. I told him I would no longer be contributing to Olivia's school fees because I did not trust him, or Caroline, to be honest with her about where the money was coming from, and I would make my own arrangements directly with the school and with her. I told him he was welcome to visit me. I told him I was not cutting him off from my life. I was only cutting him off from my wallet and from my silence. I told him that I loved him. I told him I had always loved him. And I told him that love, in the end, is not the same as permission. He tried to argue. He tried to explain. He told me Caroline would be devastated. He told me I didn't understand the pressures of his world. He told me I was being manipulated by a 13-year-old who didn't understand adult dynamics. I said, "Andrew, I spent 41 years watching people die in the cardiac ward. I understand more about adult dynamics than you will understand in your lifetime. Good night." And then I hung up. Caroline tried to come by the house the next morning. I watched her through the front window Land Rover in the driveway, wrapped in her cream cashmere, rehearsing something on her lips. I didn't open the door. I let her ring the bell 3 times, and then I watched her get back in the car and drive away. She sent a long text. I deleted it without reading. Andrew came on Saturday, alone. He stood on my front porch in the snow, without his coat buttoned properly, and he looked like a little boy who had forgotten his mittens. I let him in. I made him a cup of tea. I did not make him a sandwich. He tried to apologize. He tried to bargain. He offered to post a correction on Caroline's Instagram account. He offered to invite me to the hospital's spring fundraiser. He offered to pay back the $147,000 in installments over 10 years. I told him I didn't want the money back. I told him I didn't want a public correction. I told him what I wanted was for him to understand, in his bones, that what he had done was not a small thing, that it was not a misunderstanding, that it was a choice he had been making quietly for years, and that I had paid for every part of it. He cried at my kitchen table. He asked if I could ever forgive him. And this is the part I still turn over in my mind some nights, because I am his mother, and a mother's love does not turn off like a tap. I looked at him, my boy, my Andrew, the baby I had rocked through 3 weeks of colic in the winter of 1982, and I felt all of it, the love, the grief, the exhaustion. I said, "Andrew, I might forgive you one day. But forgiveness isn't a door you walk back through to where you were before. It's a door to somewhere new, and I don't know yet what that somewhere looks like." He nodded. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, the way he used to when he was 8 years old. He said, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I said, "I hope so." I walked him to the door. I watched him get in the car. I closed the door, and I locked it, and then I stood in the front hall of my house on the street, where I had lived for 31 years, and I let myself breathe. It's been 14 months now. Olivia and I see each other every Sunday. I pick her up from Branksome Hall on Friday afternoons sometimes, and we go for dim sum in Chinatown or walk along the boardwalk at the beaches. She's 14 now, and she's tall, and she looks more like my mother every year. She knows about the trust. She asked me once why I'd done it, and I told her the truth, because you were the only one who called me that night, and because you were brave enough to tell me what you'd heard. She said, "Grandma, that's not fair. You loved me before any of that." And I said, "Sweetheart, you're right. But fair has very little to do with how I love people. It has to do with how I protect them. Andrew and I have coffee once a month, just the two of us. Caroline is not invited and has not asked to be. We talk about small things mostly. His work, Olivia, the weather. Sometimes we talk about his father, which we hadn't done in years. Last month he asked me about the Corolla, and we laughed, and I thought maybe one day. I took that trip to Quebec City, finally, by myself. 3 nights at the Chateau Frontenac in September, which is the prettiest month to go. I walked on the plains of Abraham and ate a tourtière at a restaurant on Rue Saint-Jean and watched the light change over the street Lawrence from my hotel window. It cost me $4,000, and it was worth every penny. And I sold the good wool coat from Simon's. I donated it to a shelter downtown. I don't need a coat I can't wear without remembering a Tim Hortons booth. If you're listening to this, and any part of it sounds familiar to you if you have spent your life making yourself useful to children who have, somewhere along the way, stopped seeing you, I want to tell you what I wish someone had told me 30 years ago. You are not selfish for noticing. You are not cruel for naming it. And you are not obligated, at any age, to keep paying for a seat at a table where they've already decided you don't belong. I waited at that bus stop that Tim Hortons, close enough for 3 hours on a February night. And in the end, the only person who picked me up was me. I think she was worth waiting for.